and organisations who are experiencing disruption on a major scale. Our interest was in understanding the impact of people and how organisations manage that impact. Australia Post was one of our pin-up organisations we wanted involved. So I'm very pleased David can join us today. Please welcome David. Over to you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Damian. The only thing I could add on there, to be fair, Damian, it's not me alone. I think there's an organisation, which we'll talk about in a minute, that have done a tremendous job over the last 18 to 24 months to actually support our people and actually ensure that, to your point, through this difficult and strange time, we've done all we can for our people. I thought what might be good just to check in. I hope everybody is okay following the earthquake this morning, Damian, as you called out. What a strange way to start today. In terms of Australia Post, our journey, I'd probably step back 2 years ago to give context. In December 2019, for the first time, we were starting to see as an organisation this e-commerce boom. And we talk often about in those 4 or 5 weeks leading into Christmas, we would have anything between 5 and 7 million parcels in a week. And we would get excited and say, wow, that's really a peak period. And we're starting to see the change from letters into parcels. When you fast forward to January, February last year, which feels such a long way away, we were dealing with bushfires. We're dealing with a number of our people being caught up in regional areas. And so standing up and supporting them post that big Christmas seemed like one of the biggest things we've ever done in our business. And as we rallied together, no sooner had we worked through January, February, all of a sudden we found ourselves, like many organizations, confronted with what we now then found out to be a pandemic. And our response was in many ways diverse. We didn't have a clear path and plan that we were going to get straight after. And so what we did is, in many cases, got together many of our leadership teams, got our people together. And what we started to talk about is, what are some of the things we needed to do in the short to medium term to do two things? One, ensure the safety of our people and taking care of them. And then importantly, how do we stand up and support the community? And we weren't quite sure about the second one. The reality is we had seen quite a cyclical business and how we support the community and our customers, but we'd never really seen a big change and uplift in online e-commerce and parcel support. And in those first 4 or 5 weeks of March and April, we found ourselves in a situation where we were making decisions to, in a combination of ways, make sure the front line was safe and supporting the community. Similarly, there were a number of projects, programs across a big organization we just put on pause. And I share that because we were reacting to what we didn't know, and we'd made some decisions that we weren't quite clear with. At the end of the day, we needed to make more deliberate decisions based on our business not being clear on what the next 6 or 12 months will look like. Within 4 or 5 weeks, as I shared, of doing that, we saw one of the most amazing disruptive periods ever in our business. We had asked people to actually take a few weeks leave. We had to call them back. We'd asked some people in the day to potentially just wait and see if at the end of the day there's an opportunity for us to get them involved in other areas of the business. We were calling them back. No sooner had we brought them back, we were looking to hire in between 4,000 and 5,000 people. We had seen from the Christmas of 7 million parcels, all of a sudden this massive growth, where in the next 48 weeks, we saw 7 million parcels every week for those 48 weeks. So lots of disruption. And as an organization, what we were trying to do is manage the magnitude and scale of that change. And some of the things as an organization we needed to recognize quite quickly is that we didn't have the support from the broader infrastructure within Australia. So with airlines being grounded, we couldn't move product and services around as quick as we thought we could in the past. So how were we going to do that differently? We obviously had to have different views on our fleet, logistical infrastructure, and looking through the supply chain. Similarly, it meant a lot of our people who were working on certain key programs, pivoting and redirecting them to actually help and stand up some of these new initiatives to ensure that our people today could work safely, but also be able to support the community. And one of the most remarkable things I recall back in that Easter weekend of last year, people phoning and saying, Dave, you've never seen anything like this. We are seeing garden furniture. We're seeing alcohol come through the network, gym equipment, all kinds of things we were just dealing with, which probably as an organization, we had seen snippets of that probably over the year or two before, but we'd never seen anything quite extraordinary come through our network. And so getting the workforce to think differently, react differently, became one of the biggest things that we rallied around as an organization. And I think all roads lead to leadership, the importance of not having very convoluted, complicated forums to decide things. So becoming a lot more agile, decision-making was a lot freer. And importantly, in a large organization, trusting people at all levels to make the right decision to support our customers, and then really importantly, supporting our people and keeping them safe. The two or three things I'd love to just share in terms of the actual challenges around COVID and keeping our people safe, particularly that 90% of our frontline have continued to be providing services and going out there every day, whether it be delivering a parcel, a letter to our customers, or rendering a service behind our account in our retail stores. The key thing has been ensuring that we look at how can we support them, putting the right infrastructure in place, not only resources, but often at the end of the day, support systems behind that. How do we give people the opportunity to step back, know that they've got permission to pause, and importantly, where they need support, be able to actually ask and reach out. And that's not always that easy when you're running at pace. In many instances, you've got lots of people trying to do the right thing, but not quite sure today who they can turn to. And so we've learned on the fly. We've actually, along the way, realized that there's a number of things that we put in place in those early months that have really secured us and set us up for what has become almost a new COVID normal. And those include delineating certain of our work areas so that if we had some certain challenges where people needed to self-isolate or somebody had contracted COVID, that we could actually give people the opportunity to continue working in a particular section, whether it be processing or in our retail stores. And then finally, when I think about where we've got to in the last few months, I talked about 48 weeks doing 7 million parcels. In the last 6 weeks, I can share with you, we've been running at between 10 and 12 million parcels a week. So with half of the country in some form of lockdown or with restrictions in place, what we've seen is a really strong need for us to support our people and ensure that we've got the right resources in place to actually deal with the magnitude of those changes and the support needed. I'd say, Damian, probably one of the most remarkable things we've seen with this volume spike is the way people actually have supported, not only within the community, but even within the organization, our people. And whether that's a call center, whether it's the HR function or finance, we've seen even in the last few weekends where people aren't able to come in, there's self-isolation requirements in certain states. People have stood up, administrative staff getting involved, being prepared to actually get in on weekends and help out to try and keep continuity in the community. So it's been all hands on, a phenomenal experience. And dare I say, we're not through it. We've got some way still to go.
Thanks, David. There was some really good insights into some of the challenges that you faced over the last 18 months or so. As I said earlier, we've had a number of questions that have come in, but I just wanted to follow up on 2 points that you raised there. So when you talked about the beginning of COVID and the kind of turmoil that put not only your business, but every business in, from a leadership perspective and management perspective, what kind of templates or how did you manage to make sense of it all?
I don't think there's any template that we can say we had in place. I think what we did in the first few months is we quickly learned that we would have a number of teams have to be needing to be stood up to actually support different parts of our business, whether that be retail, our deliveries, our corporate teams. So being open to actually trying different things would be my response. I think leadership, trusting and empowering, that it's not a question of having things signed off, having at the end of the day some form of structure and policy and protocol in place, being flexible to actually let that happen at any level within the organization. And a good example is allowing people within those first few weeks of March to immediately have those teams be set up successfully and remotely and to work from home. And that's been the case now for some 18 months. And we think that'll continue till early part of next year when we'll review that and see whether that's sustainable for many of our employees and whether that actually works or doesn't. So I think there's a lot of learnings along the way that we've implemented. I'd also say there's a few mistakes we made along the way. There were decisions that we probably made quite early, reacting to what we thought might be actually, for us, a business that might be challenged by volumes coming off and potentially by some of the community needing to actually not use our services. And a good example were passports that needed to be processed and so forth. What we quickly learned out of that experience was pivoting people to actually help other areas. And so I'd say to you, there was a lot of learning on the way. One that I'd definitely like to call out, Damian, was seeing the leadership, particularly within our executive group, rally around and being very supportive of our teams and whatever was needed. And in a disruptive phase, like we were going in those first few months, we often talked about being grateful and how do we actually recognize the role we need to play in supporting the community. And I think that rally within our leadership group really carried across the organisation, recognising that we had the opportunity to continue to support the country. And then that's continued to be one of the most important things for us to focus on and support.
Okay, it's really, as you say, it's fascinating for every organisation, but with your scale and the fact that you're very much in the public eye, it probably you're probably more accountable than most.
That's right.
I know this is maybe a little bit sensitive, but in your career at Australia Post, you've seen several changes of CEO, and you're going through one at the moment. What advice can you offer our audience in terms of managing that transition, and what has been your approach to managing your HR team through those transitions?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I'm open-minded to that. I think there's a lot of things that I've learned along the way, and I'm still learning. And that is, I've seen the CEOs that have gone before Paul, who's coming in, Paul Graham, that is joining us in the coming days, were amazing in terms of being able to enable their strategy and their thinking in the business, and the foresight to make sure we transformed our business into a more parcel-orientated business with a very strong focus to support the community and customer. I cannot be underestimated. And so I think those two CEOs have built what I think is a business that is sustainable, and more importantly at the end of the day, is one that can be successful going forward, rather than at the end of the day, one that would need to change and as a postal organisation reset where it was going. And if you look globally, what we've seen talking to our colleagues overseas in the postal organisations, they are going through the same disruption and facing into the same challenges in terms of parcel growth. So the foresight would be definitely one that I think I'm really proud, and being part of that has been an amazing experience. I think the balance between being in the public eye and how the community perceives the role that we should play is really an important learning. And we continue as an organisation to focus and recognise that we don't always get that right. And how things probably played out in the last 12 months is not something that as an organisation we necessarily would like to have seen that. Internally, employees feel very strongly that there were really things that we could have done better as an organisation, and our focus was to be on the community and the customer, not necessarily see our leadership changes play out in the public domain. So open and transparent. And then the final one, I think we're excited. There's a really nice, if I can use the word, vibe at the moment in Post. We've seen extraordinary volumes. I've talked about rallying our people behind ensuring we're supporting the community. But with Paul Graham coming in over the last few weeks, there's a bit of a buzz around the place. And I probably would be unfair to say that there's high expectations with him coming in next week. And he probably knows that he's going to have broad shoulders given his predecessors who have been there before him.
That's good. Okay. This was a question that came in from somebody who's attending today. What advice would you have on supporting leaders who must navigate not only their own energy and engagement, but also that of their team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in the current times, that's very important. And I would say the experience and also the advice that I've been given is, you cannot be everything to everyone. And importantly, you've got to know when you can actually step away, take a break, be respectful in terms of how you do things. And the examples that I would share with you is changing the way we've operated. We've had specific ways of interacting with our teams. We've had I call them traditional behaviors around team meetings, weekly forums. We've disrupted a lot of those. The ability to have more interaction, more communication in the early days have been absolutely the big changes we've needed. The idea that we can do things differently. You don't need to actually be physically in person all the time. That has been one of the biggest step change, particularly in a business like ours. Respecting that we've got a frontline that need to be supported. And so at the end of the day, in those instances, being present, actually at the end of the day, physically and in person in many instances has helped people seeing that leadership are actually there to support, but also at the same time demonstrating the importance of supporting the community. So I think varying approaches has been important. If I keep it real simple, I think knowing that some of your teams will cope and particularly deal with the changes differently. And that's no different to my own team. We've seen that play out over the last 12 to 18 months. And I said it up front, getting advice, asking for support. So the ability to actually reach out, and we've used a number of external partners. We've leveraged internally where teams have done well. that shared learning mindset for me, particularly in the last 6 or 7 months, Damian, has probably been the biggest shift in our culture as an organization. And then the last one is where I started, and that is culturally, as an organization, we would have some very strong control processes. And being an organization our size and scale, there's certain things that have to be done in a particular way. There's lots of regulatory requirements. I think being open that is important, that's good governance, but respecting that many of our people who've been there for some time know how it works and trusting them to do the right thing. So the idea of having to follow up, have the same rhythms, and checking in, changing that up has been probably the biggest thing for us. And mental health for us leads into that, where in some of the more difficult environments, what we've needed to do is give people the permission to pause more often and make sure we've got the right support in place.
Okay. Now we'll talk about COVID.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a view on COVID. How did you ensure the on-site and remote workers continued to engage on a work or social level?
Yeah, I was going to open up and say, Damian, I'm not quite sure there's a COVID normal. I've heard that thrown around over the last 12 months. So I'm not sure what really normal is.
Each new day.
Yeah, that's right. It's ebb and flow. We're very open as an organisation. We've realised that whether it be in each of our states or wherever we're in our business, it's very, very different. The one thing that's constant, though, is ensuring that today we're supporting our people. I think where we've gone to is making sure that wherever possible, we've actually been able to put support mechanisms in place and ensure that our people at the end of the day know that that support is there. Real simple upfront was making sure that people had the right technology and support at home. And like most organizations, that seems so simple. But what we learned quite quickly is in a large organization like ours, that wasn't always the case. And so in those first 2 to 3 months, there was a really key focus to enable people to successfully work remotely. And that's remained a very strong focus. So having the right technology, the ability to enable people to do their job successfully, but also comfortably. I think we've got better and we've learned along the way around what works and doesn't. And we tried, whether it be Teams, WebEx, Zoom, we tried a number of platforms as we went along. And our technology team were quite open and expansive with that and helped us through that journey. And I share that with you because for many people, that experience actually helped enable what was the best way forward for us as an organization. And so what we've seen is an improvement around how we use technology, the ability to actually support our people and enable them to do that. Probably where we've got some work to do is, I think, as we get longer into lockdowns, and this is primarily we've seen in Victoria and recently in New South Wales, that we need to think about how we refresh some of that. And examples we've seen is not everybody wants to actually continue to remain remotely. Some people actually like the idea of being able to come into an office or into one of our physical post offices or be a processing facility and just interact with people. And so when things eased off through those lockdowns, we've been quite deliberate in opening that and allowing people to do that. So varying at the end of the day, the options for people has been important. Damian, I'd say we have got some of that right as an organisation. And I think there's parts that I think we still can work on and improve.
Okay, now the question that is causing a lot of disruption in Melbourne at the moment. Australia Post workforce reflects, I guess, the cultural diversity of Australian society.
Yes.
How are you managing the vax question?
Yeah, I guess we could never have a conversation without talking about vaccines at some stage. For us, we've taken the position that we would not mandate vaccinations as an organisation. What we have done, though, is been very strong in supporting our people over the last several months. And what that's looked like is ensuring we've provided, wherever possible, within each of the states, the necessary time, the necessary support, whether it's pop-up facilities, whether it's at the end of the day, trialing certain opportunities in facilities to actually have some of the medical teams come in and work with our teams. That's definitely been our focus. And we've been very proactive on that. We've also mandated that what we want to do is ensure that we're supporting people to provide their records of vaccinations. And the reason for that is to assist where we can potentially, in a particular state or an area, and we've got some really big, large processing teams to ensure we can actually provide more support for those people where they want to actually be vaccinated. I think one of the things we're facing into in the coming months, we recognise a number of our customers and within the community, you said it, we obviously have different views on that. And so what we're needing to do is engage a lot more proactively with customers and certain of our customers in relation to vaccinations.
Okay, good, thanks, David. I'm sure everyone's interested in how everyone's dealing with this problem. If we talk about engagement, David, what insights and actions have you been able to drive off the back of your engagement program?
For Post, when I think about engagement, we as an organisation have been very strong on focusing on our engagement for a number of years. And we've got in many of our scorecards, in many of the programs that we run, a very strong focus around what are the initiatives that we can continue to support, whether it be teams, individuals, and importantly, culturally in our organisation, what are the drivers to actually move our culture forward? I'd say probably in the last 18 months, I've seen a very strong progression to both focusing on engagement, but more importantly around culture. And it's interesting, we're measuring both engagement and culture in the organisation. And what we're starting to see, particularly over the last 12 months, is actually a huge increase in a number of our teams who are working remotely around their engagement and importantly, their cultural scores. What's interesting for us, and we're not surprised, but it was important for us to look at is we've not necessarily seen the same results across many of our frontline employees. And the reasons for that we've seen is that there's obviously a number of challenges that they're facing every day in the community, whether it's irate customers all the way through at the end of the day, trying to deal with the complexity of the pandemic and their own families and communities. We've seen obviously some of those results not as strong as one would expect. What do we need to do? I think we've been very clear over the last few months. Safety remains most important, ensuring the care of our people. And a good example of that is some 3 weeks ago, one of the most difficult decisions we had to take as an organisation is to go to all of our customers and say to them, we need to pause. And the reason for that pause was related to safety. A number of our employees were either needing to self-isolate for the 2 weeks. And what we got to was a situation where across the country, we weren't able to, in a safe manner, either deliver or collect product and services or parcels from our customers. And so the decision was taken. And as we move forward, that'll continue to remain one of the most important things we do. So I think there's a number of things we definitely feel we're doing right. I think one thing I'd like to just say, Damian, with Paul coming in, one of the conversations we've had, you talked about, a new CEO and what's our view. We've been very strong on ensuring in his first 90 days, how do we ensure we give Paul as much visibility of Post culture and where we've come from as an organisation? And importantly, when we think about our values, how do we actually embed him in those? And what's been interesting in the first few interactions is his response around the importance of people, which I think we'd all say that's an expectation of a CEO, but he has really been strong on that and around customer and the importance of the role we play in doing that, primarily ensuring safety of our people.
This question came through just this morning. What initiatives are you putting in place to support employees to create and keep agreements to build trust?
Well, that's a big one. I think there are a number of things we're doing well, I think, in terms of extending the level of support at all levels across the organisation. So not necessarily working in a strong hierarchical organisation. And I think that's been really good because it's helped teams to just, dare I say, in their particular forums and in particular functions to continue to run and do things. I think the idea of actually ensuring that leaders are clear around what's expected of them has been probably one of the biggest things that we've seen in terms of shift. And that's been a combination of more frequent interaction, understanding and having access to data. And this probably leads to what's helped us is technology. Not only thinking about people who are working remotely, but we've been able to introduce technology in the last 18 months. Probably the highest frequency of technology that we've ever had across the organisation is taking place. And that's allowing us to communicate with our people directly rather than having what I would call a lot of manual interventions. And it sounds almost bizarre, in 2021. But for us as an organisation, it took us a long time to stand that up. And if there's anything I say has been a success, is absolutely enabling that, which allows people to, dare I say, whether it's interacting with customers or within their own teams, they now can do that. There's no strong reliance on having to come from a particular function or an area. So I think changing the way we operate, technology has been one of those. And I think going forward, the one that I think is really important is in terms of how Paul comes in and resets the leadership team, the importance of continuing to take a lot of those learnings. We're a stronger collaborating organisation, I'd say, in the last 18 months, and trusting our people at the end of the day, I'm hoping is one of those things that Paul will continue to support, and importantly, at the end of the day, dare I say, enable that culture going forward, rather than reverting back to what I would have seen probably 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. Now, if we talk about disruption and change, as we said earlier, Aus Post is confronted with disruption on a daily basis. What advice can you offer for the audience in terms of how to think about disruption and how to prepare yourself and your team to manage successfully?
I think the learnings that I've derived in the last 18 months is that change is constant. You hear that so often. Be open to that. I think what I've done is listened and learnt a lot more. The ability to take good advice from within. In the organisation our size, there are a number of people that have got great experience and knowledge. Leverage that. I think what you should expect is that there's also a number of things you don't always have the answers to, and be open to actually trialing a few things and being comfortable to fail. We've learned in the last 18 months, there's a number of things we stood up and they didn't always work, but we were quite comfortable to say, we tried that, and guess what? We're going to move on and take those learnings and try something different. So fear of failure has changed in ours. We've accepted that there's a few things we are going to get wrong. I talked about being criticised and questioned around how we operate. Anything I've learned through change in the last several months has been be open to that and be prepared that when you are making changes, that not everyone's going to agree with them. And it does get louder when you're moving as fast as we are with the number of changes we needed to make to support our people. You're not going to actually get everybody on side and not necessarily have them believing that what you're doing is the right thing. So I've purposefully changed my mode and my mindset around that. You cannot engage everybody, but you've got to understand that you've got to at some stage loop back and see how you're traveling as an organization and how you're supporting a team. So I put that out there, and that's quite controversial. I've had lots of discussions with some senior leaders who feel like we should spend more time getting that right, higher level of engagement. I'm not saying that we're not doing it. I'm just saying you've got to recognize when things are moving as quick as they are, you will make mistakes and you won't always get it right. Be open to that. And then the last one is respect. I know it sounds so simple, but I've seen over the last 18 months, whether it be customers, whether it be through lockdowns, interactions as we went out back in February and March and here in Melbourne, Victoria, when things were opening up, people aren't always necessarily happy to be back. They've got some anger that they need to get out. And sometimes what we learned is that is in our organisation, because we look at them dealing and supporting our customers and dealing with a number of these challenges. So be respectful and understand that in many instances, what you're seeing play out in the external environment is often what's happening in your internal environment. So be open to that. And for many of our leaders who were supporting a leading change, that awareness around what are you doing to actually support your people through these changes became even more important. And then lastly, for an HR team and then P&C function, Damian, you can't support everybody 100% of the time. What I realized quite quickly, you do need to tap out and step away. And through the changes we've made, particularly in the last 18 months and supported, I've realized that sometimes that needs to be a lot quicker and a lot faster and more regular. Whereas in the past, you'd go on for a few months and then think, maybe you need to take two or 3 weeks. I think changing that up is one thing that I've learned we need to do differently and better.
Learning from the AFL and how they use interchange, David.
That's right.
With the disruption Australia Post has experienced from moving letters to moving parcels, what has been the impact on the workforce skill sets, and what programs have you considered implemented to address the gaps?
Yeah, that's probably the real underlying opportunity we've been facing into now for, I'd say, a good few years. And the dynamic we have is we, as a community business, continue to provide both letters and parcels. And so what we're continuing to do is we need both those skill sets, but also we've got to think about the future of work. And so the real changes we brought about is thinking about those capabilities probably 3-5 years ago and starting to make significant changes in the way we actually attract certain talent to certain roles. And that, I would say to you, is primarily around being more tech savvy, digital orientation, and building teams that we would call internally long-running teams to help us, whether that's with product all the way through to helping our teams better connect and support customers. And that technology, I get excited when I see how that has advanced in the last 12 months. The teams that we have in place have been absolutely amazing. They've come to the forefront in our organization and stood out, particularly standing us up in difficult times. So I think technology and the ability to have particularly those digital teams is one of the biggest things that is in our favor. Our frontline is remarkable. And I think being able to not only change the capability that we need, but also thinking about how we're going to do that differently. So modes of transport, we've focused heavily in the last 12 to 18 months on electrical vehicles, electrical bikes. One of the biggest challenges we have is traditionally we're one of the last countries where post is on motorbikes. So how do we, from a safety point of view, but also motor transport, change the way people operate? And as simple as that might sound, it's supporting people to become more comfortable in how to do that. I think also the other areas is the ability for us to think about general practical jobs that we would have trusted people internally to have to continue to do administrative roles. We've been able to simplify a lot of those and, dare I say, automate a lot of those over the last 18 months. So changing skill sets, I think, is a combination of bringing in talent. And then lastly, in terms of home growing leaders, what we've been trying to do is, importantly, in certain areas, through our grad programs and early career programs, ensure we're bringing in the right talent to actually backfill or have the ability to go in some of these new roles. Without going too detailed, I'd say one of the things that we're really excited about is the future of work and what does that look like over the next 3 to 5 years. We talked about this almost 2 years ago, and I smile as I say this, and what we've seen transform in terms of e-commerce in the last 12 months, we would never have expected. Our projections would have been maybe 3 to 5 years more. So our ability to move really quickly is important. Like most organizations, we do have a challenge right now, which is we're not seeing the opportunity to bring some of those skill sets in freely. And so with the market being closed and us not necessarily having access to a lot of talent abroad, that is putting a lot of pressure on some of those key roles.
Do you think, David, just following from that I guess the willingness of people to make those changes and adapt the way they work and think about the way they work, is that a reflection of their confidence perhaps in the leadership of the organisation, do you think?
I think it is. I think you asked a question earlier around trust. I absolutely believe that. I think the more people are comfortable to use technology, and the example I've seen is we've got a number of our team members who would have been in the organisation for many years in rural and regional parts of Australia. Many of our post offices have people who well established in the community, been with Post for a long time, doing reverse mentoring where we've got some people who understand the technology and are comfortable with it, partnering with those individuals and supporting them through this massive transformation has been one of the most exciting things to watch. And we've got more to do in that regard. But those are the examples where we think internally, as people become more comfortable and they trust that we actually do support this, that you'll see most teams just get on and make it happen. I also think the leadership being prepared to fund and support more of those programs sends the right signal where people actually believe that if these make sense and they're going to help our people, there's definitely leadership backing them.
That's good. This is an interesting question that came in. Do you find the disruptive environment is better than the previous way of working?
Personally, I do. I'll go there. I haven't said that yet today personally. I think I'm excited by the last 18 months. I'm not necessarily overwhelmed by the changes we're going through. I think it's a great opportunity for us as a business to think and operate differently. What's driving that are our customers. They're expecting better service. They're expecting same-day service. They want to know when their parcels are arriving. So ETA is so critical for us. So how do we do that differently? And I think for us, that excites us. How do we ensure we got our people having that right mindset and having the right capability, mode of transport to do it? So I'm really excited by that. A lot of the discussions we've had and, dare I say, reviews and forums, a lot of that is translated into what we've been able to achieve. I think the most important one, Damian, all of that is just how remarkable people are through adversity. And in the last 12, 18 months, we've seen that people being comfortable to pivot and do different things, try different things, supporting that when things don't work, it's okay. So personally, I'm very excited. Having said that, I think there's a balance. I think what we've got to recognize that not everybody at the end of the day responds and necessarily sees all those opportunities. And what we've had to also recognize, people working remotely, whether it be people in our teams that have young families, individuals are single. We've got many of our teams who are working overseas and then were caught not being able to come back. I think dealing with that complexity, we've realized that we need to spend time as an organization recognizing that if we don't support our teams, a lot of the change that we're trying to bring about won't necessarily be successful. So working with our teams and taking them along the journey has been probably the biggest learning for me. And I call that out because for some of our leaders, there's a lot of excitement and they're energized, and you can hear I'm saying the same thing. But being tempered and making sure at the end of the day that we're working with everybody is one of the things we really strive to do. And that's not always easy.
With an organisation with the complexity and size and scale of Australia Post, how do you, it's one thing to have the people kind of follow the leader, but how do you make sure that all your leaders are playing to the same song?
It's a great question. I think you use the word trust. We've got to trust that what we've done over, I'd say, a good few years now, been very clear around our strategy. And the focus on that has been primarily in the last 3 years, how do we grow our business successfully for the community? How do we provide that service and that support to the community? So rallying our leadership group around how do we do that has been fairly clear for us. And I say fairly clear because over the last 12 months, we've never have expected how quickly it was going to go. So we were clear on what we needed to do. Perhaps the pace at which it was going to happen is one of those that as a leadership group we didn't expect. And the reason why I say it can vary is because I think for some leaders, they've thrived on the pace at which we've gone in the last 12 months. And they're very clear on that. And you can see some days I call it over enthusiastic and very much leading and supporting their teams. I think for others, particularly in the front line, many of our leaders have been in that front line for almost 18 months. There are realities around fatigue, their ability to sustain high levels of energy. And then respectfully, we've got to call it, each of the states have had very different arrangements, restrictions, and trying to navigate that, including trying to navigate and support your team, has not been easy. And many leaders are open and honest about they would love to have had the opportunity to do things a little differently, or potentially that they had more support. So I call that out because I think that's the thing that for me, as we go forward in this not sure normal, what are we going to at the end of the day continue to do to sustain that? And a good example I'd call out for us in particular, talked about the pause earlier that we had a few weeks ago. One of the opportunities we saw in the coming months would be to open retail and have more people actually being able to physically go into stores. With some of those restrictions continuing for the coming weeks, that will put more pressure on delivery organizations, in particular Australia Post, because people will still rely heavily on their parcels being delivered. So the challenge for us is how do we support our leaders in knowing that over the coming weeks, that will be the case and volumes will continue to surge, and importantly, making sure we got more resources to support them. So I call that out because that is what they're dealing with. It's dynamic. And it's not always necessarily linear, Damian, as you can imagine.
Just again, related to change, disruption, and the conversation we had earlier today. Australia Post is recognised as having a challenging industrial relations environment. Have you engaged with the unions and to discuss the impact of disruptions and what it means for work practices?
Yes, we have. We've come through the last 12 months with a number of conversations with all of our unions. We've worked very closely with them. We've actually been in an EBA year where we've got 3 to 4 EBAs that are currently underway. We just recently concluded our largest enterprise bargaining agreement for the next 3 years. And we currently have one of those that there's conversations we're currently having with, which is the TWU today, ironically. I'd say to you, the most important thing for us is to work closely with them. We see them as a key stakeholder and partner to work with us through our changes. I think in many instances, our ability to work with them and support us and our people has been one of the biggest opportunities, particularly since January, February this year, where things have been disruptive right across the country. So that continues to be the case. I think like most organisations, there's a few things that parties will agree to disagree on. But I think in the main, it's been constructive, and we want to continue to maintain that. I think we see there's a very strong need for us to work closely.
Do you feel that I guess, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention, that because of the COVID situation, they've almost been forced to work together, and that's worked well? Do you see, though, that whenever that day may be, that COVID pressures somewhat decline and life does go back to normal, that they will revert back, or the relationship will revert back, or continue in the same positive manner in which it is at the moment?
Yeah. I think the important thing for us is the safety of our people and making sure we're taking care of them. So regardless of whether you, as I said earlier, working in a retail environment, a call center, what we've been very strong on, and the unions, is ensuring the safety of our people. So in the last several weeks, whether it be in New South Wales, Victoria, even some of the states that have been open, we've collaborated on ensuring that our people are safe and we're doing the right thing by them. And I think what I've learned out of that is, regardless of post-COVID, the things that we've experienced together and worked on together, if we can translate that into our relationship and the support for our people post-COVID, whenever that might be, I think is something that we've got to hold on to. I think there's a lot of learning for both parties. We won't always admit that. I think there's always a view that there's things that we could do differently or better. But I would say we want to sustain that. I think the key thing for us is ensuring that we're looking after our people. And the enterprise bargaining agreement demonstrated that. Last year, we had the opportunity to negotiate, and we agreed to pause that. And we would come back this year and do it. We just agreed there was so much going on, so many uncertain things. And again, amicably, the parties agreed to that. So I think if there's anything we need to do, and I talked earlier about sustaining these opportunities that we've learned and experienced, that would be definitely one, working closer with the unions and in a constructive way.
It's really, I guess, encouraging to hear that despite the adversity that we've all endured over the last 18 months or so, that, some really positive learnings and behaviours have come out of it all.
Yeah, I would say absolutely yes. Yep.
Now, I've got a very specific question that has come through from one of our guests. Sure. And I know that Australia Post is a very diverse organisation. Can you talk about employment opportunities for people seeking asylum with work rights?
Yeah, I can. Over I would say almost 5-10 years now, we work closely with a number of states, governments, to ensure that we support communities that either in some way are looking for some form of work, whether that be casual, whether that be permanent. So the answer is absolutely yes. It ties really nicely into, and here's my plug for the day, Damian, and that is we at the moment looking for over 5,000 employees to help us with the volumes that we currently have. We call it peak. It seems to have been one of those where we've peaked a lot earlier than the normal process, which is around about October through December. So there's lots of opportunities. And our talent and acquisition team, even over the last 12 months, have been extraordinarily busy trying to bring people in. We have, to be fair, worked very closely with the government in specific states to see how we can support our refugees. And I'm happy to put it out there. If there's some way we can assist, or there's individuals on the call today, I'd be more than happy to put them in touch with our talent and acquisition team and see how we can support. Yep.
Thanks, David. Well, I think there might be just one or two other questions that have come through as we're speaking. Just in going back to COVID, David, are you able to share a little bit more about how you've been able to support employees in lockdown states versus the open states, or the one open state?
Yeah, it's been quite varied as we look back across each of the states. I often hear my WA colleagues say to me, the Eastern Seaboard seems to be another country, and we say the same to them. We've had multiple teams either working remotely or having a combination of those, actually being very comfortable and wanting to come into a number of our facilities or into offices. So I call that out because we've allowed that flexibility, and we've been very comfortable, back to where we talked about trust, our leadership, to actually manage that appropriately. We put the right protocols in place. We worked with the respective states and the restrictions in place. So the flexibility across the country is one of those that we've actually applied, rather than everyone work remotely and everyone's locked down and that's the way we're going to go. So being open and agile has been probably the way we've operated. I think what's been very challenging, Damian, is particularly in Victoria and somewhat in New South Wales in the last 12 to 18 weeks, with some of the changes around how those restrictions obviously are being implemented and snap lockdowns. What we've decided through many of those changes is to practically, where people can work remotely, support them to work remotely, rather than putting them in harm's way or in any way creating further anxiety for people who are in the front line. So that's been a very deliberate decision we've made, and we've held to that, particularly knowing that some of those restrictions will only be lifted probably post-October from what we're hearing. I think the open-mindedness around teams talking to each other and supporting that's okay has been primarily supported by many of our safety teams to ensure that they know what the protocols are. And importantly, as people travel around states, which I'll share with you, we're obviously moving a lot of parcels around Australia, is ensuring the safety of our people as they move across border lines is also looked after. And I call that one out because in many instances, we've not been able to necessarily fly product or parcels around the country in all cases. And so being able to diversify and do that is ensuring that people are safe to do that. And in particular cases where people have not been comfortable, how do we support them to either pick up alternative opportunities in the business or roles for the duration of those restrictions or lockdowns?
Just one quickly, were you able to learn much from the Victorian experience last year of the lockdown and apply that for some of the stuff that's happened this year?
Yeah, quickly I have, Damian. I think one of the things that we learned is in those early months, we put in place a number of protocols for those working remotely. In particular, in a number of our facilities, post offices are referred to, we put in protocols, whether that were screens all the way through to segmenting our workforce. They couldn't go across into a particular area. It seemed quite radical in the beginning because we were thinking, gosh, why are we doing this? Ironically, as we went through particularly the difficult period last year in Victoria, this time, September, October, we had to reduce the workforce by a third. That stood us up in good stead, where we were able to continue to support our teams and manage that appropriately. As we've had these further snap lockdowns, we've managed to sustain some of our teams to continue working as a result of that, even with people having to self-isolate, etc. I've got to share that that's become very difficult, particularly in the last 4 to 8 weeks, maintaining that, particularly with the number of people needing to either self-isolate or have time away from work. And I've got to add in the mix there that what we are seeing, like most organizations do in the winter months, people obviously do fall ill in the front line, and therefore you're going to see people needing some time away to recoup.
Mm-hmm. And just one final question. We talked a little bit earlier about some mental health and well-being. Have you got some examples of some of the strategies that you put in place there to kind of better manage that situation?
I think the partnerships that we've had in place have been really important for us, and we've been doing that for some time as an organisation. How do we support our leaders to be more comfortable to support their teams and the role that they need to play? So I think we've seen that really come to fruition in the last 12 months, where some of those skills and support mechanisms have really helped those leaders. I think we're seeing more and more pressure grow as people continue to work remotely. And for us, that has been a number of partnerships, whether it be Beyond Blue, Community Corp is a group we've been working with. They've been fantastic in working with our teams. I know many organizations and HR practitioners know EAP is one of those that we've really seen continue today to be supported but important in our business, and extending the extent of those services has been so important, not only for employees but many of our extended workforce members and family members. So we've seen that definitely in the last 12 to 18 months being very important for our people and families. And then the other one that I'd call out is leaders themselves knowing that they're not always in a position to necessarily play the role that many of them think they should in terms of supporting the people and looking for support themselves. And I call that out because probably, and I include myself here, there's a point in time where you've got to recognize that you don't have all the skill sets and you don't necessarily have the ability to always solve or resolve matters. And how do you know, importantly, how to actually draw from somebody who has that experience or that skill set? And that's been one of the biggest shifts in the organization. Damian, as I think aloud in terms of the importance of mental health, for us, what we're definitely seeing is in the front line is that remains probably one of the more pressing challenges in the coming months for us, particularly with the extent of lockdowns, where people are having to continue to operate, but knowing that many of their family members are either doing the same or having to either work remotely. And that's very challenging. That's one of those that we need to continue to support.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've exhausted the question pool. So
okay.
Thank you very much, David, for your time this afternoon and for sharing some of your learnings and insights from Australia Post. It's been great to, I guess, hear how such a large organisation and complex organisation has been able to respond so quickly to service, a very big customer group. And as you say, with a growing demand in a really difficult environment, it's been a job well done. So thank you very much, David.
Yeah, thank you, Damian. And my closing comment would be, if you're doing your Christmas shopping, I'd suggest, can you try and get in a little earlier this year, knowing the volumes that are expected over the coming months. Thank you, Damian.
Just out of interest, when if lockdown ever finishes, how much of a negative impact will that have on your business?
We've done, without going too detailed, we've done a lot of modelling on what that might look like. I think in some instances, we think that actually might, in some sectors, benefit us being able to actually have more capacity and the ability to actually improve services. But importantly, what we think is, from what we've seen since last year, many people are remaining or staying online. So it's going to be interesting to see what transpires in the early part of next year, whether people actually do take up going into physical stores or doing a bit of both.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you everyone for attending. Kate will send out, as I said, the survey immediately after this. So if you could spend 5 minutes just responding to that would be much appreciated from our perspective. But once again, thank you. Our next meeting is in October, and we have Maya as our guest. So I'm sure we're all interested to hear about how they've dealt with COVID and retail and lockdowns and all those kind of issues. So we look forward to seeing you at our October meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
You're driving the bus, I think, Kate.